We begin this Monday with increasing international calls for Israel to scale back its assault on Gaza, and that includes from its closest ally, the United States. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was in Tel Aviv on Monday to talk to Israeli leaders about how they could better protect civilians in the war against Hamas, a group considered a terrorist organization by numerous countries. Now, according to the Hamas-run Health Ministry in Gaza, the death toll in the Gaza Strip has now surpassed 19,400.
Shocked and in grief, these people in Gaza's central city of Deir el-Bala mourn the loss of their loved ones. And as in many of the past Israeli strikes, many of those hit are children. Scenes like these are increasing pressure on Israel to protect civilians, a call also echoed by the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin.
Protecting Palestinian civilians in Gaza is both a moral duty and a strategic imperative. So we will continue to stand up for Israel's bedrock right to defend itself. And we will also continue to urge the protection of civilians during conflict and to increase the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. That's important as Israel fights to dismantle the Hamas terrorist infrastructure in Gaza.
Israel says it is targeting Hamas militants. But the fighting has led to one of the worst humanitarian crises ever in Gaza. Food and clean water has become scarce for the Strip's over 2 million people. And according to the UN, 90% of the population has been displaced.
I brought some water from our neighbour over there. I brought the water and we needed dough. We don't have a single drop of water left. There is nothing at all.
The head of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees has warned that Gazans could start dying of hunger, disease, and weak immunity. Along with the aid entering Gaza through the Rafah crossing, trucks have also started entering from Israel via Kerem Shalom. But the UN says the conditions on the ground are unsuitable for delivering humanitarian supplies. Many see a halt in fighting as the only solution, an urgent call that's now being echoed by many of Israel's allies.
All right, for more now, we want to cross over to journalist Sami Sockol in Jerusalem. Sami, you followed that press conference. What more can you tell us?
So, Secretary Austin was talking not only about the humanitarian aid that has to go into the Gaza Strip, and not only about the Palestinian lives, but he was also talking specifically about the surgical strikes, that Israel has to adopt surgical strikes. There have been close talks between the parties, and they went into details of how the next stages should be. At the same time, Austin was saying that he doesn't give Israel any deadlines, and this was also reiterated by Yoav Gallant himself, is that he was saying that there is no ticking clock and that the Israeli operation will continue, but they have agreed to further have a closer coordination with the continuing of the campaign. He said that America is giving advice to the Israelis, and Gallant was saying that they're listening to the advice.
So they're listening to that advice. Are you seeing then, Sami, any signs that Israel might be looking at changing its strategy in Gaza?
Well, I must say that on the ground, you really don't see it. And, you know, today there was a Human Rights Watch report talking about hunger as a strategy, and they're talking about the severe situation in the Gaza Strip. The strikes are continuing inside the Gaza Strip, and it's not clear yet when this actually will materialize into a change in the way Israel is waging its campaign in Gaza. This might be something that will take time.
The Prime Minister, we know that he is under a lot of pressure from outside of the country. What about domestic pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu?
Yeah, what we've seen following the killing of the three hostages, that there is a surge of anger among the families of the hostages, among those who were released. They were saying that what happened there is actually a reflection that the military operating in the Gaza Strip is not focused at looking for hostages, but rather focusing on a different mission, which is a revenge mission targeting Hamas. And we've seen these kind of demonstrations. At the same time, I must tell you that many people in Israel believe that Netanyahu is committed to continuing this war, and he's attaching his political future with the extension of the war, as this is something that can play for him, since the failure of the 7th of October is very much identified with him. A victory over Hamas could be saving him politically in the Israeli internal arena.
Journalist Sami Sockol with the latest tonight from Jerusalem. Sami, as always, thank you.
Tania Krämer is DW's correspondent in Jerusalem, and earlier I asked her whether the growing international pressure on Israel is having any effect on the government there.
Well, there's certainly more international pressure, but it doesn't seem to have a visible impact yet on the Israeli government here or their decisions. We've actually heard again from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over the weekend saying that for Israel to achieve its goal, it needs to keep up the military pressure to topple Hamas, to dismantle their military capabilities, and also to release potentially more Israeli hostages that are being held in Gaza. Now, we're expecting also in this regard the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin arrived in Israel now to talk about this. He said that he will talk with his counterparts here about the ironclad commitment of the United States to Israel in its war efforts, but he also said that there needs to be more done to protect civilians in Gaza, and that more aid needs to be flowing into Gaza. Now, we've seen Israel has some sort of reopened one of its crossing, the Kerem Shalom crossing, at least for some more trucks to go in there. But on the ground, humanitarian organizations are saying in Gaza the situation is as dire. The impact is not that felt because over 1.9 million people, Gazans, residents, have been displaced, most of them multiple times during this war, mainly now to the south. The aid distribution is very difficult, and also the death toll is mounting every day.
A UN Security Council vote on a ceasefire resolution for Gaza set to take place on Monday has reportedly been postponed to allow further negotiations. As Israel continues its war against Hamas in the territory, Human Rights Watch has accused it of using starvation as a weapon. The rights watchdog says that it has evidence that Israel is deliberately starving civilians and blocking deliveries of food, water, and fuel into Gaza. Israel denies the accusations and has accused the group of anti-Semitism. My next guest is Bushra Khalidi. She is from Oxfam, and she joins us from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. It's good to have you with us this evening. Human Rights Watch accusing Israel of committing war crimes, saying that its forces are deliberately blocking the delivery of aid such as water, food, and fuel. What's your take on this accusation?
It's important to differentiate the mandate that Human Rights Watch and Oxfam have. We're a humanitarian organization. We deliver aid. We work within an international humanitarian law framework. We don't make determinations of war crimes or investigate human rights violation. We monitor them so that they inform our policy position. But from what we know before October 7th, we know that Israel was in grave violation of its duties and responsibilities towards Gaza's population as the occupier. It occupies Gaza, it controls all the borders of Gaza. It controls how much goes in and comes out of Gaza, whether that's people or goods. And that's before the 7th of October. That siege was tightened on the 9th of October in response to the atrocities of the 7th of October. Switching off electricity, water, restricting aid and preventing fuel from entering Gaza is collective punishment, and that does amount to war crime. And using starvation as a weapon of war, we also, have evidence from crops being completely destroyed, the only wheat mill in Gaza not able to operate. And currently, we only have 5 to 10% of needs being met with the delivery of aid inside Gaza. All of this points to grave violations of international law, where we have people literally almost starving to death in Gaza right now.
Let me ask you, too, Israel says that it is doing everything in its power to protect civilians in Gaza. Is that the impression that you and your team on the ground are getting?
Well, that was another point I wanted to answer in your previous question. Is another thing that points to war crimes are the indiscriminate nature of the attacks. We have seen an entire healthcare system collapse. We're talking about a city of 2.2 million people. This is a large city. It's very densely populated. There's over 30 hospitals. Most of them are barely running, if running at all. In the north, the situation is even more frightening. We have the situation at Kamal Adwan hospital, where it's been besieged and we have people inside trapped. We've heard horrific reports from what's happening in the north. We know that women are, we have a complete healthcare collapse. There's been targeted attacks on UN shelters, on bakeries, on solar panels. So all of this points to the indiscriminate nature of the attacks over the course of the past 2.5 months in Gaza.
Ms. Khalidi, let me ask you, too, about some videos that surfaced on Sunday showing Palestinians chasing after, climbing onto moving aid trucks at the Rafah border crossing. I mean, this looks like the picture of desperation. How would you describe the current situation on the ground in Gaza?
I'd like to, if you permit me, read a quote from my brother-in-law, who I spoke to yesterday, and I transcribed the conversation with him. If I may?
Okay.
We've hit a point of complete exhaustion. There's simply nothing to eat. Even if the war were to stop right now, it almost feels meaningless. Life itself seems meaningless. We're like the walking dead, devoid of life. Aid is scarce. Where I'm staying now, we have nothing. No food, no electricity, no water. The effort to find and break wood for fire just to eat something is backbreaking. Even basic needs like using the bathroom becomes a challenge without water. The relentless task of maintaining a fire is the most draining thing. I've been using garlic cloves to treat my fever and flu because medicine is nowhere to be found. The constant buzz of the drones is unbearable. You don't understand. It eats at my bones. It's so loud, constantly interrupting sleep and conversation. Yet we find ways to cope. We joke and we sing. We still have hope, but we need to conserve energy of what comes next. You know what they say, the after party?
Bushra Khalidi from Oxfam, we appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts and to share the thoughts as well as others about the situation on the ground there in Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you.
For more on the situation in Gaza, we can now talk to Juliette Touma. She's a Director of Communications for the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees and joins us from the Jordanian capital, Amman, which borders Israel. Juliette, Human Rights Watch accusing Israel of committing war crimes there, saying its forces are deliberately blocking the delivery of aid, such as food and water. Has your agency seen anything that would confirm those very serious accusations?
Look, while we are not at all in a position at UNRWA to determine whether it is a war crime or not, what I can tell you for sure is that food, fuel, water, and information, they've all been used as weapons of war during this brutal 70 days. If you recall, for the first 2 weeks since the war started, there was a total hermetic siege on the Gaza Strip, and nothing has come in, including food or water.
So do you confirm then the allegations that Human Rights Watch levels at Israel?
Like I said, I'm not in a position to confirm that. I'm here to give you the latest on the ground and what has been happening since the beginning of the war. And there has been serious restrictions on access of humanitarian assistance to the Gaza Strip. That also included food, fuel, and water. And since then, there's been very, very little of these critical supplies allowed into Gaza, and not enough, and do not match at all the overwhelming humanitarian needs on the ground.
Now, Israel says it's doing everything in its power to protect civilians in Gaza. Is that the impression that you and your team on the ground are getting currently?
Well, 136 UNRWA colleagues have been killed so far. We have also reports that 70% of those killed in the Gaza Strip since the war started are believed to be women and children. When it comes to United Nations facilities, UNRWA, where I work, we have recorded more than 170 hits on our facilities, including those who we were using as shelters. And in those incidents, we had at least 1,000 people injured, nearly 200 people killed. And these facilities are United Nations facilities, and they need to be protected at all times, including in times of conflict, by all parties.
Now, the UN Security Council will vote on another resolution calling for an urgent and sustainable cessation of hostilities in Gaza. Short of a ceasefire, do you see any other option to get aid into Gaza?
There needs to be a ceasefire, a humanitarian ceasefire, that will also allow the United Nations and other humanitarian agencies to bring in much needed supplies without conditions, with a regular flow of basic supplies. I mean, look, we're talking about the basics here. People are coming to UNRWA and saying to us, what am I going to do with a can of beans? Because this is all I have for the coming 3 days for me and my children. We are down to delivering 1 bottle of water and a can of tuna to a family of 6 or 7. It's that bad.
Juliette Touma there, Director of Communications for the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees. Thank you very much.